Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we'll be exploring something, well, it's a bit of a personal passion of mine, and I'm sure it is for many of you listening as well.
Hey.
We're going to be talking all about exercise.
Oh,
It's something that's obviously been a part of human existence for millennia,
of course. Of course.
but how we've thought about it and how we've practiced it has really dramatically changed over time.
It really has.
And to guide us through this exploration, we'll be drawing from excerpts from Bill Hayes's book, Sweat, A History of Exercise.
Fantastic.
It's really, really interesting book.
Yeah.
And it's full of anecdotes and kind of unexpected facts that even I, as someone who's really interested in exercise, never really knew.
Interesting.
So I'm excited to get into it.
Me too.
So our mission today is to kind of dive deep into how exercise has been viewed and practiced from like antiquity all the way up to the present day.
Okay.
I thought it'd be fun to start with something you're personally connected to,
Uh-huh.
swimming.
Swimming, right?
And to think about it in the context of ancient Greece and Egypt.
Hmm.
You know, it's so interesting to consider that back then, it was like an essential survival skill.
Absolutely.
It wasn't like a leisure activity.
Right.
It was something that everybody needed to know how to do in case they fell into a river or were near the ocean.
Absolutely. It was vital.
And even more so, it's fascinating to think that it was taught to everyone,
Wow.
including women,
Right.
which was not common for many other physical activities at the time.
Interesting. Yeah.
But even though it was so widespread, it wasn't a competitive sport,
Right.
which I find really intriguing.
Yeah, that is interesting.
In contrast to something like boxing,
Boxing, of course.
which has been a popular spectator sport seemingly forever,
It seems like it.
even in ancient times.
Right.
And Hayes talks about this really vividly.
Okay.
He describes watching boxing with his father and how it kind of evokes this feeling of those old gladiatorial matches.
Oh, wow.
The sweat, the struggle,
Right.
the almost animalistic nature of it all.
Intense. That is intense.
Kind of timeless in a way, you know?
It's that primal urge, I suppose.
Moving on now, let's step back in time
Okay.
and meet this fascinating figure, Girolamo Mercuriale.
Girolamo Mercuriale.
He's a physician in the 16th century, and he wrote this book called Gymnastica.
Gymnastica. Okay.
And what's really striking about his work is that he advocated for exercise as a way to achieve health,
Health. Okay.
not beauty.
Interesting. So not for aesthetics.
Exactly. It's a real contrast to what we see a lot today with the emphasis on like sculpting the perfect physique.
Right. Right. The whole body image thing.
But even though he was ahead of his time in that sense, his understanding of the body was still based on humoral theory,
Humoral theory.
which was this ancient Greek idea that health depended on the balance of the four humors.
Okay.
And those were...
Blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile.
Right, I've heard of those.
So even a learned physician like Mercuriale didn't have the scientific grounding that we have today. Interesting. So he was using exercise to manipulate those humors.
That's right.
Fascinating.
And it's worth noting that he also wrote another book called De Decorazione Liber,
De Decorazione Liber.
which is all about sweat and cosmetics.
Sweat and cosmetics, huh?
So he clearly had a diverse range of interests.
It seems so. Quite a character.
Now let's turn our attention back to ancient Greece,
Okay.
because there's this really interesting paradox there.
A paradox. Okay.
On one hand, you have this ideal of the strong, athletic physique.
Right. Like the classic Greek statues.
Right. But on the other hand, women were largely excluded from formal exercise spaces.
Oh, so a bit of a double standard there.
Exactly. And one of the few glimpses we have of women exercising in ancient Rome comes from this mosaic
A mosaic.
called the Bikini Girls.
Bikini Girls. What an interesting name.
It depicts women engaging in various athletic activities,
Okay.
but it's not entirely clear whether this was like a common occurrence or more of an idealized image.
Right. So it could be propaganda or just, art.
Exactly. It raises this question of to what extent do historical depictions reflect actual practices versus like aspirations or ideals.
That's a great point. Something to think about as we go through all of this.
Absolutely. And it's something that we'll need to keep in mind as we move forward.
Okay.
Speaking of moving forward,
Right.
let's fast forward to the 19th century and the work of Pehr Henrik Ling.
Pehr Henrik Ling.
He was a Swedish fencing master,
A fencing master.
and he basically revolutionized exercise with his system of gymnastics.
Oh, wow. So he's like the father of modern gymnastics.
You could say that.
Interesting.
And his impact on modern physical education is really huge.
Okay.
He not only laid the groundwork for greater acceptance of women's exercise,
So he was progressive in that way?
Yes, very much so.
Mm.
But he also developed specific movements for addressing, like, medical conditions.
So he was thinking about the therapeutic applications of exercise.
Exactly.
That's ahead of his time.
And this shift from humoral theory to a focus on anatomy and physiology is a
Okay.
really key turning point.
I see. So we're getting closer to the modern understanding of the body.
Right, and this all ties into a broader historical context,
Uh-huh.
which is the rise of what's called somatic nationalism.
Ecstatic nationalism.
So basically, after Napoleon's conquest, there was this huge push to promote physical fitness
Right.
for military readiness.
Right. So exercise becomes tied up with national strength and identity.
Exactly.
Interesting.
It's another example of how exercise has been shaped by social and political forces.
Makes sense.
Now let's talk about something a little less militaristic.
Okay.
The bicycle,
The bicycle.
which might seem like just a mode of transportation.
Right. A way to get around.
But its invention in the 19th century actually had a huge impact on women's exercise.
Really?
Specifically, the safety bicycle design,
The safety bicycle.
which featured this step-through frame,
Okay.
allowed women to cycle
I see.
while wearing long skirts.
So it gave them a newfound freedom of movement.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
This was a real game changer.
Right.
It gave women unprecedented mobility, and it really challenged traditional notions of femininity.
Interesting how technology can have these unintended social consequences.
And now we come to a figure who I think is particularly fascinating,
Okay, who's that?
Eugen Sandow.
Eugen Sandow.
He was a 19th century strongman,
A strong man.
and you can say he was like the pioneer of bodybuilding.
Oh, wow. So he's the one who popularized that whole aesthetic.
Yeah. He had this incredible sculpted physique,
Okay.
which he showcased in performances and photographs.
Interesting. So he was like a performer as well.
Very much so, and he really popularized the idea of exercise for purely aesthetic purposes.
So he was all about looks.
To a large extent, yes. But it's important to note that his approach was quite different from later bodybuilding trends.
Like what we see today.
Right, especially the trends that emerged in the 1970s.
The Arnold Schwarzenegger era.
Exactly, where the use of performance-enhancing drugs became more prevalent.
Right. That whole push for an almost superhuman physique.
It really blurred the lines between strength, health, and the pursuit of an idealized image.
A complex issue for sure.
Now, Hay's book isn't just about these broad historical trends.
Okay.
He also brings in a lot of his own personal experiences.
Personal experiences.
For instance, he talks about taking up boxing
boxing.
at the age of 57.
Wow, that's quite a feat.
And he describes this gritty boxing gym,
Okay.
which was a far cry from the kind of sleek fitness studios that are popular these days.
So a real old school boxing gym.
Exactly. And it really highlights how exercise can be a very mental and emotional undertaking.
Not just physical.
Right. It requires you to confront fear, cultivate discipline, and push your boundaries in ways you might not expect.
That's a great point.
And on a more personal note, Hayes also talks about his experience with exercise after his partner Steve passed away.
Oh, I see.
Exercise became a way for him to cope with grief
Okay.
and to maintain both his physical and mental well-being.
So it was a source of strength and healing.
Exactly. And it really underscores the power of exercise as a tool for resilience,
That's really powerful.
especially in the face of loss and adversity.
Absolutely.
And even during the pandemic.
You're right.
He talks about swimming in this almost deserted pool.
I remember those days.
And it really highlights the profound impact that exercise had on his well-being.
So it was a lifeline for him.
Very much so. During a time of isolation and uncertainty,
Makes sense.
it really speaks to the enduring ability of movement to nourish both body and mind.
That's a great way to put it. It's about the whole person.
And it makes me wonder,
Yeah.
how can we harness that potential
The potential of exercise.
to navigate the complexities of our own lives?
That's the question, isn't it?
It's something that requires introspection, I think,
Right.
and experimentation,
And a willingness to be open to new things.
and to really embrace the transformative nature of physical activity.
I think that's a great place to leave it for now.
Absolutely.
Lots to think about.
Indeed.
Very interesting stuff.
Thanks so much for your insights.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening.
Right.
We'll be back soon to continue our exploration
Looking forward to it.
of the fascinating history of exercise.
It's been a great discussion.
See you next time.
Bye for now.
Hayes' personal exploration actually leads us to a really important moment
Okay.
in the scientific understanding of exercise.
Okay.
And that's the work of Dr. Jeremy Morris in the 1950s.
Dr. Jeremy Morris.
His research provided the first real concrete evidence linking exercise to a lower risk of heart disease.
Really? So that's a relatively recent
I
discovery.
know, it's amazing to think about, isn't it?
It is.
Considering how fundamental that knowledge is today.
It's taken for granted now almost.
Right, and Dr. Morris's findings really revolutionized our understanding of exercise,
I see.
and they laid the foundation for a lot of modern exercise science.
So a real pioneer in the field.
Absolutely, and this validation of exercise's benefits really started to shift public awareness.
People started to pay attention.
Exactly, and a great example of this is the creation of the President's Council on Physical Fitness under Eisenhower,
Oh, right.
and then its promotion by Kennedy.
Kennedy was very physically fit.
He was, and that really helped to bring exercise into the national spotlight.
So it became a matter of national importance.
It did, and this awareness wasn't just limited to men either.
Right.
Title IX, which was implemented in the 1970s, really helped to level the playing field for women in sports.
Title IX, that was a big one.
It was. It mandated equal opportunities and funding for girls and women in educational settings.
So it opened up a lot of doors.
It did, although there were certainly some controversies about funding allocations.
Right. It's never a perfectly smooth process.
But overall, Title IX had a hugely positive impact on women's access to exercise and sports.
I agree. A real turning point.
And speaking of influential women, we can't forget Jane Fonda.
Jane Fonda and her aerobics videos.
Exactly. She really brought exercise into people's homes
She did. She made it accessible.
and enjoyable for a much wider audience.
I remember those videos. They were everywhere.
They were, and Fonda's impact was immense.
She was a cultural icon.
She turned exercise into a cultural movement, really.
And she motivated so many people to get moving.
Absolutely, and she really helped to make exercise fun and engaging for women especially.
Right. She challenged some of those traditional ideas about what exercise should look like.
She did, and it's important to remember that Hayes' story isn't all about triumph and achievement.
Okay.
He also talks very candidly about his own struggles with burnout.
Burnout, that's something a lot of people can relate to.
I think so, and it's a reminder that even the most dedicated fitness enthusiasts need to listen to their bodies
Right. You can't push yourself too hard.
and incorporate rest and recovery into their routine.
Rest is so important.
It is, and it's often something that gets overlooked in our culture's obsession with pushing limits.
Always striving for more.
The principles of specificity, overload, and reversibility really underscore the importance of balance.
Balance and adaptation.
Exactly. You need to give your body time to recover,
Otherwise, you risk injury or just exhaustion.
and that can ultimately lead to setbacks.
Right. It defeats the whole purpose.
Now, shifting gears a bit,
Okay.
it's impossible to talk about the history of exercise without acknowledging the AIDS pandemic.
The AIDS crisis had a profound impact on so many things.
It did, and it really changed the way many people, particularly in the gay community, viewed exercise.
How so?
Exercise became inextricably linked with survival, body image, and community support.
I can see that in a time of such fear and loss.
It was a way to fight back
To take control.
and to find strength and solidarity.
A sense of community.
Exactly. And Hayes' account of his partner Steve's battle with AIDS is incredibly moving.
It must have been a difficult time.
It was, and the way he describes the role that exercise played in Steve's life is really powerful.
So it was a source of hope and strength.
It was, and it really underscores how exercise can be so much more than just a physical pursuit.
It can be a profound emotional experience.
It can be a coping mechanism, a source of comfort, and a way to reclaim control over one's body.
Especially in the face of illness and uncertainty.
Exactly. And as we continue to delve deeper into the history of exercise,
Okay.
we come across these fascinating little nuggets of information.
Like what?
Well, for example, did you know that ancient athletes used to use sweat scrapings as a remedy for various ailments?
Sweat scrapings? That's a new one.
I know it sounds bizarre to us now,
It does.
but it really highlights how much our understanding of the body has changed over time.
Right. What was once seen as a potent elixir.
Is now just a byproduct of exertion.
Fascinating how our perceptions change.
And speaking of changing perceptions, let's talk about fencing.
Fencing!
Hayes tells this great story about finding a centuries-old fencing manual in a library in Paris.
A fencing manual.
And it really made him realize that sword fighting was once considered a form of exercise,
Interesting, like a way to stay in shape.
and even a path to self-improvement.
So it wasn't just about combat.
It was about discipline and skill, and even grace.
I can see that.
It's a reminder that activities that were once essential for survival or combat
Right.
can evolve into something completely different.
Like forms of recreation or personal growth.
Exactly. And then there's the yoga master that Hayes encounters in Rome.
A yoga master in Rome?
I know, it's not what you'd expect.
Not exactly the typical yoga setting.
But this master had a very unique approach.
How so?
He emphasized slow, deliberate movements
Okay.
and a deep connection with the body.
So very different from the high-intensity yoga that's popular now.
Very different. And it's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to exercise.
It's about finding what works for you,
Exactly. What aligns with your individual needs and goals.
whether it's a vigorous workout or something more gentle and mindful.
Absolutely. And Hayes also talks about his own experience with running.
Running. That's a classic.
He describes it as a way to connect with nature
I can see that.
and to experience time differently.
Time differently, how so?
It's hard to explain, but when you're running, it's like you enter this different state of consciousness.
Interesting. A flow state, maybe?
Maybe. And he also delves into the science of running,
The science.
talking about how our bodies evolved for endurance
Right. We're built to run.
and how sweating played a crucial role in our survival as a species.
Sweating, keeping us cool.
And Hayes actually goes into quite a bit of detail about the eccrine glands.
Eccrine glands, those are the sweat glands, right?
They are, and they're responsible for regulating our body temperature.
So it's not just about getting sweaty.
It's a vital physiological process.
That keeps us from overheating.
Exactly. And running, of course, has all sorts of other benefits.
Right, like cardiovascular health.
And Hayes talks about the release of endorphins
Endorphins, those feel-good chemicals.
and the production of human growth factor.
Interesting.
And he even touches on the potential role of exercise in enhancing cognitive function.
So it's good for our brains, too.
It seems so. But as with anything, it's important to find a balance.
Right, you don't want to overdo it.
Hayes emphasizes the importance of rest,
Rest and recovery.
allowing our bodies to repair and adapt.
And ultimately to grow stronger.
He actually talks about taking a prolonged break from both exercise and writing.
A break from both.
He needed time to recharge.
It happens.
And when he eventually came back to both,
He did it in a more balanced way.
more mindful and intentional,
So it's about finding a sustainable rhythm
a rhythm that works for you
that respects your body's needs.
and allows you to fully embrace the transformative power of movement. It's a good reminder that our relationship with exercise isn't static.
Right.
It's something that can change and evolve.
Throughout our lives.
Exactly. And as we continue to explore the history of exercise,
Okay.
we come across some really unexpected twists and turns.
Like what?
Well, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
Mercuriale, the physician we talked about earlier,
The one who wrote Gymnastica.
he also wrote this other book
Another one.
called De Decoratione Liber.
Decorazione Liber.
And it's all about cosmetics and physical attractiveness.
Cosmetics, really?
It might seem a bit superficial at first glance,
It does.
especially considering his focus on health and gymnastica.
Right. It seems like a contradiction.
But when you think about it in the context of the time,
Okay.
it reveals this broader societal preoccupation with appearance.
People have always been interested in looking good.
It seems so, and even a physician devoted to health
Like Mercuriale.
acknowledged the allure of enhancing one's external form.
Interesting. So it's not just a modern phenomenon.
Not at all, and it's a reminder that history is full of these complex and sometimes contradictory impulses.
Human nature is complicated.
It is, and I think that's part of what makes studying history so fascinating.
I agree.
Now, to wrap up our exploration,
Okay.
I thought we could take a virtual trip to Olympia.
Olympia, the birthplace of the Olympic Games.
Exactly. Hayes describes his own visit to this ancient site.
It must have been amazing to be there.
He talks about retracing the steps of those legendary athletes.
Wow, to imagine them competing in those ancient games.
It's incredible to think about. Those races, the wrestling matches, even the pancration.
The pancration, that was a brutal sport.
It was a no-holds-barred combat sport.
So different from the Olympics we know today.
And yet there's this thread of continuity, this desire to push human limits.
That competitive spirit.
It's timeless, and while we may not be engaging in gladiatorial contests anymore,
Thankfully.
there's still that drive within us
To challenge ourselves.
to test our physical and mental boundaries.
Whether it's running a marathon or just trying a new workout class.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the key takeaways from this deep dive.
What is that?
Exercise is more than just a physical activity.
Okay.
It's a reflection of who we are as human beings.
Our history, our culture, our values.
And it's something that has the power to connect us
to each other.
to our past.
And to our own potential.
Absolutely. Before we go, I thought it might be helpful
Uh-huh.
to distill some of the key takeaways from our exploration.
A nice summary.
So here are 10 things to remember about the history of exercise.
Okay, I'm listening.
First, exercise has been practiced for millennia, evolving from survival needs and military preparedness to encompass health aesthetics and personal well-being.
A long and varied history.
Second, our scientific understanding of the body and exercise has dramatically changed,
From humoral theory to modern science.
leading to more effective and informed training methods.
Right, we've come a long way.
Third, access to exercise and perceptions of women's participation have significantly shifted, thanks to pioneers like Pehr Henrik Ling, Catherine Beecher, and Jane Fonda.
And legislation like Title Knives.
But the fight for complete equity continues.
Of course.
Fourth, technological advancements like the invention of the bicycle have revolutionized personal transportation and recreation,
Especially for women.
challenging traditional views of femininity.
Right, breaking down barriers.
Fifth, balance and adaptation are essential for long-term fitness success.
Rest and recovery are just as important as pushing yourself.
And understanding the principles of specificity and overload is crucial.
It's about working smarter, not just harder.
Sixth, exercise can be an incredibly powerful tool for coping with grief
And maintaining mental and physical health.
and fostering a sense of community, especially during challenging times.
Like the AIDS pandemic.
Seventh, motivations for exercise have varied throughout history,
And they continue to evolve today.
influenced by cultural norms, scientific advancements, and personal experiences.
It's a complex interplay of factors.
Eighth, the tools and methods for exercising have transformed dramatically.
From ancient gymnasia to modern gyms.
And now we have home workouts and virtual fitness programs.
So many options.
Ninth, exercise's impact extends far beyond physical health.
It affects our mental well-being, our self-perception, our social connections.
It's truly holistic.
It's not the whole person.
And finally, 10th, the history of exercise offers valuable insights into our understanding of the body.
Health and the human experience.
It prompts us to consider how we approach physical activity in our own lives
To find what works for us.
and to appreciate the incredible journey that exercise has taken us on.
From ancient times to the present day.
So as we conclude this deep dive,
Right.
I'm left with this one question.
What's that?
Given the long and captivating history of exercise, what does the future hold?
That's a great question.
What new forms of movement will emerge?
And how will technology shape our relationship with exercise?
It's something to ponder as we continue our own individual journeys
Exploring the transformative power of movement.
and discovering the unique role that exercise plays in our lives.
Thanks for this fascinating discussion.
It's been a pleasure.